Hello, Francisco. Thank you so much for coming on today. Um,
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm so excited to talk to you. And also, you are one of our first people that's going to get to do a show and tell because you actually have the products that we want to talk about and the ingredients. So I'm so excited. And we're going to get into your beautiful sustainable beauty brand, Costa Brazil, a little bit more. But you've had such an impressive career to date before Costa. So I'd love for you to kind of give our audience just a bit of a brief background on sort of your initial venture into luxury and design and how it kind of led you up to the creation of Costa, really.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. Francisco Costa here. As you know, or if you don't know, I've been in the fashion industry for quite some time. I would say 25 years, and been working with Tom Ford at Gucci for a couple of years, Oscar de la Renta, Bill Blass, and finally at Calvin, which I stayed as a creative director of the women's department for about 13 years. And winds of change. I felt very much towards the end of my tenure over there that I needed to do something that was a little more authentic to myself, something that would make me happier. And very honestly, the sustainability seemed like something that was really often very related to throughout my career. In hindsight, if you think of collections that I've done at Calvin, where I was the first designer in America really in the last 20 years to abolish the use of fur, and I never thought of that till later, actually after I left the company. I had made moves that were really, ahead of its time, I might say, in respect to respect nature, the world, and having a more sustainable way of thinking, what I mean, for the future. So we did collections that were like, completely recycled from, yarns I had found in mills out of Scotland and Italy. I would call, the knitting manufacturers, this is what you have left in your stock. What is sitting there for 100 years that you have never used? So let me use that. So there was always been unconscientiously really the preoccupation of the somewhat, how can I say, I was always touching, the subject without really being conscious about what I was doing in that sense, and without being very aware of the consequences. But again, brought me back even further back when I think of my growing up in a small, very small town in Brazil, in the state of Minas Gerais, in the mountains, where my mom had a children's wear manufacturer. She employed about 125 women, and I think I got a lot of this from her because, again, also being in a very simple environment, with such great leadership and vision from her, I think I experienced growing up things of that manner. For instance, she created a little school for women to actually learn how to sew, how to do the embroidery. As they graduated from that situation, they would get employed. She also did a home for the children, so that women can actually go to work. So right from the get-go, I mean, I think she really, she was an example to me of empowerment, of how can you really build or make a difference in a community or in a society. But in a very simple way, right? I remember also that she would get the remains of all the textiles that was cut from the garments, and she would distribute them in small villages across town, like the rural areas, so the women could learn how to do quilts, and then she would support them, in selling. She was very, very charitable in that sense, very responsible. She always, thought ahead. And I think today, very honestly, I think the whole reverence comes from her, growing up with such mind. And it came very naturally, right? When people ask me, okay, why did you go from design of fashion to beauty? What kind of reinvention that was? Why did you reinvent yourself? So it wasn't so much a reinvention. I think it was just sitting there, ready to be explored, like you have, so many different pillars within that built you as a person and what have you, and your interests. So I think they have to be fed. And it just so happened that after 13 years at Calvin, I felt change was coming and I needed to do something even more amazing, something a little more brave, something that spoke of me, my roots, in a more authentic way. So there we go. Costa Brazil, arrived.
That's such a great story, and I love that about your mother. It's really funny. I feel like so many people I speak to in this journey of running Revolver, like so many of them have had upbringings similar to you, where I see it in myself. I grew up in a little teeny seaside town in Maine, and my mom was so into the environment and planting and, quite hippie-ish really. And for many years, I tried to escape that, and I thought of luxury as something very different. And I moved to Paris, and I lived in New York, and I didn't want anything to do with that sort of country lifestyle. And now I can feel myself being drawn back into that, really. And I think it's really interesting timing, because it seems to me like luxury is almost going through this redefinition, like the luxury that we knew in the 1990s and the early 2000s, of very ostentatious, very designer-led, very big label. It's not really that luxurious. It's not that cool anymore. It seems like the cool luxury is sort of this more understated, natural, holistic way of living. I mean, would you agree with that, or do you think there's still room for the big, loud, sexy, maybe less sustainable luxury?
No, and less sustainable, no. I mean, it has to be sustainable. It has to be really conscientious, and we live in a different world, and it's going to accelerate. I think we're going to have to be a lot more aware of our surroundings, our people. People are going to go to tremendous difficulties right now, right? Yesterday, I listened to an amazing, the Governor Cuomo was just on television on CNN speaking right after he left the White House about his conversation with the president. And it was so inspiring, because he drew a paradox to, 1929, where, the Great Depression, and why the US got out of it. So I think today, yes, there has to be a lot of incentives, right? Infrastructure seems to be his biggest worry, and something that the US, for instance, needs desperately. But it's these rethinking of how we actually communicate, how we support each other, being less corporate driven perhaps, and supporting our small businesses, right? Support everyone that's really surrounding us. Because if you start, cooperating and creating that sort of nucleus within your surroundings, people that you deal with, and it just builds up, so little cells could change the whole situation. Going back to sustainability, I think everything has to be super sustainable. Transparency is, extremely important throughout anything you do. And I think we're just going to be analyzing things a little more, a little deeper. Why do I really need this? What does this bring to my life, and how is it made, and who made it? Am I providing support to X, Y, and Z communities, and what have you? Yeah. What I don't believe it's going to disappear is beauty, right? Beauty is the essence of how we live. We like to surround ourselves with beauty. We like to surround ourselves with design. And I think I really believe that, beauty and design is together, when it's done in a sustainable way, completes this incredible, trilogy of thinking. So I hope that we get even more creative. I think that we will get even more curious about how to explore things, how to design, and how to make a woman look beautiful. How the clothes that we wear now really has an impact. Not just an aesthetic impact, but actually a social impact. So I think that will be reinterpreted. I hope that we, as designers, as creators, will overcome the this craziness and come up with something really good. I always thought that courage, right, the 60s was so utopian, and I kept thinking, I always loved courage, mind you. I love the lines, I love what he proposed, but it was a utopia, and it was so away from reality, right? I mean, he was really ahead of its time, pushing a silhouette and a construction of garments and fabrics. They were really futuristic. It was beautiful, the futurism. But today, the future is now, and the future is being molded by a real current situation that will affect the way we live. So something will come out of there. And I always thought that something new would happen in fashion if we really felt, skin, the winds of change, the new reality. And I think this is the time. And I think when I say this is the time, I really think of the whole production aspect of creating fashion, creating, or design, anything, in fact, because we overproduced for so many years, right? There was so much overproduction. There was so much consumerism, so much greed, coming from everywhere.
Yeah.
So I think this kind of sort of like buffer into the world makes us, okay, let's step back, let's reinvent our ways. We're going to consume less, but we're going to consume better. We're going to look for organic, we're going to look for things that will make you smile, simple desires. Yeah. So I believe very much in that. But I also believe in, again, as design shaping our existence, technology shaping our existence. I think it's fundamentally how the way we live now and how that will grow, right? I think we can't go back. There's no way of going back. I think the future will be brighter, but in many, many ways. We just have to go through a little, reshaping.
Yeah, it's so funny. I had this guy, I had Ben Pundle on the podcast last week, and he said that he felt like Mother Earth had sent us all to our rooms to think about what we'd been doing to her for the last 50 years. And he said, to him, the companies and the individuals that come out of this, time in our rooms, as it were, with more passion, more purpose, more intention to live better and inspire other people to live better, those were the people that were going to come out on top. And I loved that. And it sounds like you're saying something really similar. So it leads me nicely into my next question, which is, for the people that I think a lot of people right now are questioning the way they've lived their lives, the jobs that they've had, the companies they've worked for or bought from. And as someone who went from such a massive fashion entity into a small new entrepreneurial role as founder of Costa Brazil, how have you found that transition personally? Has it been challenging? Has it been the best thing ever, the worst thing ever? How has it impacted you as a human, really?
It has been the best thing ever. But believe me or not, and nobody would believe me when I say that, my existence within Calvin was very entrepreneurial. And it was not at all what it seemed to be. And what I mean by that is, when I joined the company, I was under under Calvin. A year and a half later, the company got sold, to a very large corporation. Immediately, my whole department gets laid off, and my whole team gets laid off. And I was like, okay, what? I mean, what's going on here, right? It was involuntary. I had to either to leave myself or to reinvent myself at that time and make things work. And I felt that the brand you know, was such a strong brand, obviously. I think me stepping back, you know, and not pursuing the collection, you know, it would have been, you know, quite sad for me and also for the brand. So I started campaigning within the corporation that wasn't the right thing to do.
Yeah.
That they had basically fired for contention of funds, of expenses. The whole operation, the whole collection operation in America was gone, including seamstress, everybody that was there for many, many years. And I really fought back, you know, and I really fought back. Simultaneously, they have already licensed the name to an Italian manufacturer. So now it became a license. And you know how licensing works, you know? It's driven by numbers, and forget about the core, forget about the brand. They will do whatever they want. In fact, you know, in the beginning of that relationship, you know, I would go to places in Europe and I would find Calvin Klein collection labels in the supermarkets. You know, it was that tragic.
Oh my God.
Nobody knew that. Nobody knew that. You know, I kept that quiet for very long, except that I was really fighting inside with the company to change the situation. And I managed. You know, I managed, knock on wood, you know, from working really hard. My whole studio left, and I was left off with one person who worked at the store on Madison Avenue, Josh, who was a salesperson. I said, Josh, come and help me. So the two of us actually started building the whole thing back again together. It was unbelievable. I mean, really, it's a great story. One day I'll tell in its fullest, because nobody knows. So I got, at that time, basically zero. You know, I had to go to work, but I had nothing to work with. So with that being said, you know, I had this license to work with, who operate in a completely different manner than Calvin. So it's like changing the culture of Calvin overnight. So it was very hard to make that going. So the difference is, there's no difference here. I stepped from one entrepreneurial spot, of course, you know, after my, you know, my recognition, you know, press was very wonderful. You know, I started getting a lot of acclaim and what have you. And they began to understand that there was a room for me to be there. You know, I tapped into the whole celebrity world because I thought there was a moment for that. You know, and we were in a cast of doing so much. We dressed everyone, and it became a huge pillar within Calvin Klein. So I seized an opportunity and I made it happen with very little resources, very little. And I think I succeeded. You know, after 13 years, the brand was strong, was great. You know, could have been even bigger, what have you. But anyways, I did what I could, and I was very happy and very proud about it.
Yeah.
After 13 years, of course, I did feel needed to change myself. I was just exhausted. Hello? I was just exhausted. I'm hearing an echo.
Oh, are you?
Yeah.
Let me, all right, try now.
Okay.
Yeah, good.
So I was very exhausted about being in that position, and I anticipated creating a new brand. And the brand, I thought, what is this Francisco Costa? You know, I didn't think that, you know, a brand with my name would have that much longevity. You know, times have changed. I think the lifestyle would be much more interesting to talk about and to create. So, of course, I ended up with Costa Brazil. And what does Costa Brazil mean? It's a real, true lifestyle brand, you know, based in beauty, that really exercise this Brazilianism, this Brazilian DNA, which we all love, you know. And what I'm saying that we all love is because it really exemplifies, you know, an easy, you know, lifestyle, you know, freshness, you know, a little more deconstructed, you know, where the elements of nature are so present, you know, in your life. So, for instance, you go to Rio, right? Not just the beaches. Rio is the most echo city you can possibly imagine. You know, Rio is a day city, number one, because it exudes beauty.
Mhm.
and it's in its forests, its beaches, its mountains. So it's a really day city. Everybody thinks Rio is a night city. It's not. Rio is a day city. It's about action. It's about moving. It's about, well-being. It's about hanging out with friends. It's about drinking great juices. Every corner is a juice bar, every corner. And great music. The body is seems like glorified when you think of Brazil. When you think of Rio, you think of your body. You
Yeah.
think of the relationship with your body in nature. So I think that was really perfect as a starting point to create the brand. I felt that Costa Brazil had a place to be because, being very visual, very design driven, obviously, um, it was easier to conceive, right? So I knew that the bottles had to be somewhat known. I wanted to feel that the brand was already in the back of your mind. All the objects that we created had to be somewhat already known, and somewhat high, but also low. Design is always high, but the execution and perhaps the communication needed to be more authentically, less campaign driven, a little more um, uh, organic, if I may say. So I think that exemplifies the brand because of this lifestyle in Brazil, and because of the design aspect I had already created. Of course, when I created the brand book, um, my first source of inspiration, which was very funny because I was talking to somebody about the creation of a beauty brand, and they brought it up to me that I did slightly the opposite way, the unorthodox way. I came out of the brand with the true inspiration, guided by my experience, than really a marketing PowerPoint plan. You know what I mean? So one always starts a business with PowerPoint. I started the business with the creative idea. So again, we engaged in this beautiful world, design world, feeling that now I need to go deeper into the ingredient story. I know how this is going to look. I know how this is going to feel. I know who I'm targeting it to, right? Luckily, again, very spontaneous or very organically, I think we managed to tap into a space within the market that didn't exist. Because if you think of a natural, clean beauty brand, it's either dorky or hippie, what have you. And if you think of a designer brand, you hadn't seen one designer brand that was clean. You think of Tom Ford, you think of Chanel, you think of all those people that were set, the same level. None of them really exemplified what I wanted to go. So again, we fell into this really unique situation that would give us a lot of leg, to play, and that's how we started.
Well, I mean, I'm really excited for you to kind of walk us through all of the ingredients more in depth, because they're amazing, and I've been using all of the things and I love them so much. But before we get into that, when we had dinner in London, you told me probably a longer version of what I'd like you to say now, but the story of kind of when you went into the Amazon and you found this kind of hero ingredient, and the ingredients kind of, it almost seems like they presented themselves to you in this kind of moment in your life. So can you kind of just tell everybody just a short version of how you ended up finding?
Yes. So the interesting thing is that, again, I'm going to be very brief here. I had this design. The brand was gorgeous. What's the goop, right? What could be that amazing goop that will set the difference? So I took this trip into the Amazon region, the Acre state, which is the west coast of the Amazon. And by chance, I was there for about 7 to 10 days. I was introduced to something really magical. I was introduced to Breu, B-R-E-U. Breu is a natural resin, come from an alma saga tree, which is type of tree usually grows ginormously, big, anyways, this tree gets abstracted and releases this resin. This resin is very pulpy, very gelatin-like. And I did not notice that until the day before I left, because I noticed that throughout the community, the tribe, there's fires going on, and it is scented really beautiful throughout. There was a smokiness, but there was a purity of a scent that was very unique to the area. And I thought it was the wood that was being burned. In reality, it was breu rocks that were being tossed into the fire. So I was very curious. I took the breu with me, and I sent it to a lab. So the first thing that they ever told me was, "Oh my God, this is mosquito repellent." I said, "No, it's impossible, really." The greatest thing was that while I was at the tribe, I wasn't bit once, by any mosquitoes and what have you. So when I went fishing, for instance, outside the village, I got completely taken by mosquitoes. But while I was in the village, because of the scent of breu, it really kept everything going. Breu, besides being this really magical ingredient, they believe to activate the sixth chakra, also being antimicrobial, antibacterial, it has this most incredible scent. It's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. The olfactive signature of Costa Brazil is breu, because it was so infatuated with it, of course. What we now do, we actually sell it as a natural form of incense, which would just, take a very small rock and you just burn it.
Okay.
The room gets filled with dark smoke, which I then learned that careful with your fingers, because sometimes you just burn. Obviously, being a natural resin, you also have very natural burning patterns. Sometimes it burns very fast, sometimes it doesn't burn at all. So what you do, you put rocks over this small little bean-sized rock, and the smoke becomes a white smoke instead of a black smoke. It subsidizes the heavy blackness. And then you can breathe into it. You breathe into it, and it just really, brings this calm. It's well known to help with migraines, and it's also known within the Waimanawas, the tribe they stayed with, to be very helpful in respiratory illness. So it's really, really special. Yeah. And you notice after you burn it, the room, is much calmer. Brings somewhat of peace, and it's really part of this ritual that we're trying to communicate. Taking your time for yourself. Getting in touch. With the very small things. And this is a piece of nature. This is a piece of nature. It's 100% natural, and it's really, really gorgeous. So
as somebody who's slightly into this kind of stuff and finding natural alternatives to everything, if you wanted to use it as an insect, so mosquito repeller and all this stuff, it's just awful. It's full of toxic chemicals mostly. Could you use breu? Could you burn it like that if you wanted to be outdoors and keep, for instance, mosquitoes away? Would it work?
Absolutely. That's what I experienced within the Amazon region, not knowing why I wasn't bit once. So it was fascinating when I found out. You know what I mean? That's why they were burning it all the time. And I did not notice that they were tossing those rocks into the fire until very, very late into my trip, just before I left. But so it oxidizes, right? This becomes a real rock. There's about 42 different types. In this area in Acre, you can find 42 different species of the same thing. And then sometimes they're dark, sometimes they're much lighter. For instance, this is the white breu, and this is the dark breu. And they happen to scent differently. And I think it has to do also with the time of oxidation, and of course the type of how it pops out of the tree in what circumstances. But I had a visit last year for the Global Warming Summit in September of Tashkan Waiwanawa and his wife, which was really amazing, Lara. And Lara brought us a fresh stack of breu. So here, what you have here is a bundle of this fresh resin that has been wrapped in leaves and medicinal leaves. So I was so surprised. First of all, I don't know how he passed customs with it, but I was so thrilled that he did this, because again, guys, this is heaven. So you see the difference. You know, again, it's gelatin, you know, it's like it's gummy, it's a true resin. And after it oxidizes, it becomes this rock. So here we go. And the scent, just unbelievable. So it's fun. So that was like a real trip into our, you know, experience our first ingredient. You know, got me really excited. You know, my God, this is the way to go. You know, I can't just go to a lab and say, okay, I want X, Y, and Z and stick with the label into my bottle, because the same diligence that I did about creating textile, for instance, right? I would start from a yarn base. I did here with the ingredients, you know, starting Costa Brazil.
And what are some of the other, I mean, obviously you don't need to list every single ingredient in Costa, but is there any other, and also actually, let me rewind, for, I think a lot of people too, there's so much kind of greenwashing going on in the beauty industry now. And I think people are saying, you know, clean beauty, sustainable beauty, natural beauty. And oftentimes these terms are getting thrown around and people are like, well, what the hell does any of it mean? So for you, how have you defined clean beauty for Costa Brazil? You know, what is that an absence of, and what is it an addition of, I guess?
Well, I think it's the absence of all this no-nos, right, that we try to avoid. I think for us, the fact that the ingredients have been sourced and continuously being sourced from natural environments, from the Amazon region and also from the northeast of Brazil, and some other ingredients come from also Minas, which we haven't even explored yet. I can say that, you know, the ingredients themselves speaks louder. So there's nothing to be added there. Even our preservatives are natural. So you have, you know, palrosa, you have rosemary, you know, water, you have all these wonderful things. They're, you know, natural preservatives. So there's nothing within a face oil that's bad for you. In fact, you know, you could, you know, drink it. You know what I mean? It's that clean, you know. For instance, our body oil is the same thing. The difference between our body oil and our face oil is that the formulation is a little denser, for instance, and you're going to see the purity of the product by looking at it. You know, you see that there's a density. You see there are no particles in it. But you feel the organicness, and that's the beauty of how we manufacture. You know, our ingredients being so pure and so clean, in that sense, being so natural, right? Derived from a very natural source. You know, we took a lot more time, you know, creating, reformulating with natural preservatives, which is really amazing. But also the way we produce small batches to begin with. So we want to make sure that you get the best of what the ingredient could produce. For instance, our next ingredient is kaya, right? Kaya is this natural nut. I inquired remember if as a child, you know, going to museums and seeing this tree with those ginormous coconut-like structures, almost prehistorical, you know, with a amazing pod. You know, kaya produced the white pulp inside, and then you have the seeds. You know, I was very tweaked by the whole thing. It says to this formulator, you know, let's try to create an oil of kaya and see what it is. So actually, I was in Europe on a trip, and I got a call from, you know, midnight call from, you know, this chemist, and she says, "Oh my God, we just made the oil kaya, and it's food for your body. It's food for your skin. It's the most proteic seed you can find in the Amazon. So there's more protein than any other seed, more than, you know, Brazil nut, more than peanuts, anything. So it's major. Also, there's a tremendous level of vitamin A, which is it's the #1 igniter of your body, helping your body to produce retinol. So it's natural retinol. basically, vitamin A, right? So this is really, really rich. The rich, mineral kaya, we call it, it brings this, this story even deeper. So again, to answer your question, it's hard to categorize ourselves into clean because everybody says they're clean. Of course, they're not. I can assure you that our products are 100% natural, and they're very potent. They're sustainably sourced, they're potent, and they're just really beautiful. So yet to figure it out what clean is. I was the first thing I formulated for the brand was a fragrance, which is a beautiful fragrance, which I brought with me the breu rocks. I brought leaves from the jungle, in this big bag, and I dropped off at this formulator. This nose in Brazil, and I brought half of it to another nose here in the US, and I started formulating that fragrance. Then I took it to a large-scale manufacturer, and of course, not knowing, I thought that everything they would do would be ingredient-driven, right? Basic. So of course, now they emulate some things, to become that. So I had the longest fight with, not longest fight, in-depth conversation with manufacturers on how to make things as clean as possible, as beautiful as possible, as I call it. So I think the difference between us and anybody else is that our ingredients are really for real, from the forest, from the jungle, from the deep ends of Brazil, and sourced in a very gorgeous way. We just joined this amazing organization called Provenance, which soon we are to we're going to go even more transparent in the way we communicate the brand, because we have gone through the process now, after a year and a half of existence, of creating the whole data for us to be able to explore. We've been doing things in the best way. Mind you, we're not perfect. We try our best, in every step of the way. I think packaging, for instance, is something that's quite challenging. Especially when I started, I didn't really know. I have a manufacturer making, my beautiful vessels, in China, because I couldn't afford to make them anywhere else but in China, unfortunately. And I couldn't find, or I couldn't get from the manufacturers full transparency, right? So you go, as you build, you learn, you make better decisions every day, how to go about it. You know what I mean? I think we are constantly, because also we on the mercy of nature, right? We are constantly evolving. For instance, what we built here to start with, in terms of a jungle complex, which is the breu, the kaya, and kakai. It's a trilogy of ingredients that we call the jungle complex. We're the only ones who have jungle complex, and we're the only who have kaya. This ingredient is exclusive to us because we actually, found it in a sense and have it commercialized. But it was the same thing. So a jungle complex is, this most beautiful compound, I would say a serum-like situation that when you hear jungle complex, it's Costa Brazil. Yeah. Again, we have all the no-nos, all the fit lattes, and all those things that are just damaging for you, and that doesn't even go near our formulations. And we are very diligent about it. We take it very seriously.
Yeah. And I think, Francisco, one of the things that when we first met, one of the things I was like the most keen to talk to you about, and you gave me such a great answer, and I'd love for you to share it, is basically, with your sustainable sourcing and how you've gone about working with getting these ingredients, who you're working with. I think that right now, sometimes it can seem like when we're extracting things from the Amazon rainforest, the first thing that comes to my mind is like, we need to leave the Amazon rainforest intact. We need to leave it alone. We need to not tax it anymore because obviously it's being cut down at an alarming rate. like I could go on and on about, you know, our fears of the Amazon rainforest, but what I loved was that you'd kind of come up with a way to utilize resources without damaging things. And I'd love for you to just tell us a little bit about that, and also get a little bit into your work with, is it Conservation International?
Precisely, yes.
Yeah. So
So
that
it's
piece.
very interesting because, you know, when we think, you know, what I thought what Amazon was, imagine it was just wilderness, right? It's just a jungle and nothing else. You know, the Amazon region is about 7 states, just in Brazil, you know, not considering the Colombia, Amazon, and the Venezuela and what have you, which makes it even larger. So it's a living state. You know, we imagine that's not, but it is. So the people habitating there. So there's natives, right? The indigenous people, you know, of all its kinds, you know, so many. And then there's like the Ribeirinhos, which is like a mix of a racial mix of people who have um, migrated to the region, you know, and at times mixed with you know, the indigenous people, you know, with African Americans, you might say. So it's a very mixed sort of situation there, and they really work on the banks of the river. So, for instance, when I was buying cacao, you know, from one source, and not till I found out that I could not get full transparency for this person, I reached out to Conservation International, an amazing organization, a non-profit organization that's been 35 years on the grounds, not just in Brazil, but in the whole world, really protecting, you know, really speaking, you know, louder, and being soldiers, actually, throughout the whole world, trying to protect the land. So CI has become to us this amazing pillar, you know, of support that we really trust and really support in a big way. So going back to cacao, I was buying from this one source, you know, I says, guys at CI, I'm really conflicted about this source, and I don't know what to do about it, because mind you, if you go through the cooperatives in many areas, some of them, or most of them, are already monopolized by manufacturers, right? We have the Naturas of the world, we have the Boticários of the world, which are very large corporations, right? That already buy from some areas. So it's not that you can't do that, but it's very hard. You can also not buy directly. Sometimes it's very complicated to buy directly from the indigenous community because they have no way of doing that. So you have to go to some sort of legit people that actually could make that transaction. And I learned that very quickly on my second trip into the Amazon, which I was invited to go with, you know, actually the whole team of Natura, which were very kind to take me over. So CI, you know, was really, you know, the help here that I looked, you know, very close to help me on this quest. And they have been very tremendous. So to introduce me, for instance, to this organization, this community in the borders of Brazil, Colombia, which I buy cacao. Once that community was completely lost by the, oh my God, I got a call, by the, by cultivating drugs and coke and what have you. Now, you know, cacao has become such an important part of their lives. They call it the gold of the Amazon because it really has brought tremendous, you know, success to the area, you know, not just financially, but also, you know, emotionally, schooling and what have you. So we've regenerated so much business for them. So what you do here, we try to do, is not to isolate your engagement with the Amazon. You know, it's engaging with the right way. You know, it has to be timber free. Cacao, for instance, you know, we had to identify the trees, you know, mark them, and then you go every year, and then when the crop comes, then you go and you tap into them. You know what I mean? Usually they're on the floor, you know, they collapse. So it's more of a collection, you know, thing than really, you know, not chopping trees. And by doing that, we actually incentivize, you know, people to live well, to live better, and to make better decisions for them and their families. But you can only do this really with legit people. And CI was one of those organizations that really held my hands. I'm still learning a lot from them. I sit now on the American Council board, which actually today I have a board meeting, and that's how we go about it. You know, also I buy from other ingredients because we have so many ingredients within our products that are bought from really incredible sourcing in Brazil, you know, larger corporations that are 100% transparent. So that's the excitement of it.
Mm-hmm.
And what we do here, you know, we with CI, for instance, we do very little in a sense. You know, I think the intentions are, you know, to grow, to scale our business, so we'll be able to actually contribute a little more, you know, and to be able to, you know, spread that communication a little bigger. But right now, you know, we'll do what we can, you know, in the best way. You know, we are a very small company, but you know, I think we're doing it in the right way.
I always find it so ironic when I'm having these conversations, because I obviously speak mostly to small brands, and what always shocks me is that someone like you, or I don't know, you know, any of the number of people I speak to, you know, with small amounts of resource, profits, whatever you have, you're actually giving away more, it seems like, than a lot of the biggest brands in the world. Like, do you know what I mean? It's such an odd disconnect to me that all these small brands are the ones that feel the need to really give back and to support, whereas it's almost like the big brands, they don't have that same sense. Or maybe I'm missing a trick. Did you feel like when you were working in like the more luxury sphere that there was this sort of charitable give back that was really impactful, or do you think it actually is falling more on the smaller brands?
No, I have to say though, at Calvin, you know, PVH, it was a very responsible company. But of course, you know, it's very different to make a donation, you know, and write it off, than actually, you know, create policies, right? So if you're creating policies, if you're building your company, hopefully I'll be a B Corp company, and we are on the process, I mean, for instance, of building that, creating that, that's what you do. You know, you have to know all the steps of the way in order for you to be able to be genuine about it, right? So I think some corporations do. Of course, they're much more in a corporate sponsoring way. I think they could do a lot more. You know, I could just name, you know, a few people that could really make a difference. A pledge to Amazon, for instance. You know, I mean, this is like insane. I mean, the profits just went up 37%. You know, they have to give back. It's about time. So,
I mean, Jeff said he'd personally give back, but he didn't say anything about Amazon giving back, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, I mean, mind you, I mean, it's a different spectrum, and it's insane. But then you have Bill Gates, who has done so much. You know, has been such an example, you know, of you know, how to be charitable and what have you. But anyway, going back to that, I think it's just a situation. You know, I was actually one of the things that actually attracted me to the previous organization that I worked with is that they had some conscientious, you know, they're very conscientious about how to give. Maybe we could have given more, be more involved, you know, creating policies. For instance, you know, heavily denim company, right? Talk about, you know, Calvin Klein and many others. It's a company that was really based on denim production. So, you know, if I was the CEO of that company at the time, you know, the first thing I would tackle is the denim industry. How can you modernize it? You know, how can you make it sustainable? You know, so I mean, things like that missed, you know, and I think has been missing from a lot of the corporations. But to write the check for them was just easier. So I think we are not on that capacity to write a check because we're small. Neither I think it's that interesting, you know. I think the involvement is more valid, you know, building this community. For instance, when we launched a year and a half ago, we did our first campaign. We launched on December 16th.
Okay.
On December 21st, we did a little campaign where we engaged with basically our friends to donate an emoji with Christmas tree to a friend, and then we would plant that tree through CI, through their plan. So in 4 days, we had 6,000 trees, allocated to be planted in that sense. Which again, I'm just being very simple the way planted trees. Later to understand, there's so many different types of projects in works, so many types of projects in development within CI and many other organizations. So we chose to be working with this one area within Brazil called Mato Grosso, which they call the restoration area, which is, of course, a sample trial of how to restore, the environment. So I imagine that we'd be planting now 6,000, literally 6,000 trees. So here we go. We are in this area of Mato Grosso do Sul, next to Xingu ethnicity, the Xingu, region, who had heavily been devastated by agriculture. So if you go on the Google map, if you type Xingu, Xingu, you're going to see, this park, this national park, and then surrounded by farmers. So we started this process of restoration where not just planting the trees by using, for instance, soy, chopping, machineries to actually take over seeding. So once a machine that's been, chop, soy now is actually, be adapted to seed areas in which we're seeding in a variety of different types of plants to see where that stick, because of course now that the land has been destroyed, it lacks all the minerals, it lacks all the great things. So it's a constant, trial, experiment. So we've been very successful in that region. I didn't manage to go and check what we did last year and a half, but hopefully I will do sometime. So we just also launched with CI, again, in a very simple way, a campaign called the Art Coalition. And the Art Coalition is, we engage artists, architects, painters, anyone who wants to engage with us. And then we have allocated a budget, again, a small budget from our company to CI in exchange for their participation. And it's not donating our work. You can donate our work, but it's as simple as making a post, you know what I mean? As simple as making, an artwork that, will be posted in our social, and our CI would acknowledge. So you would get, a document from CI that, that acknowledgement of their participation existed. So we do things like this all the time. Right now, we, with Brazil Foundation and Conservation International together, we created a campaign that we're going to launch on the 5th, World Environment Day. It's called Amazonia Forever. Amazonia Sempre in Portuguese. So again, here we have an artist that created this beautiful t-shirt, Nicholas Theobald, and we have a wonderful manufacturer who's actually offering their t-shirt to us called Pangaea. It's a manufacturer out of a really lovely brand out of California. So again, together we are engaging, on sending some of those t-shirts to, some ambassadors that will propel the idea, and you'll be able to buy the t-shirts for $25, $35 and what have you. So, and all the proceeds going back to that, CI activation. So, on our way, we are trying to engage, people as much as we can, building this community and creating a lot more awareness, because some corporations at the end, they become very corporate, some organizations rather becomes very corporate. So I think to humanize a little bit, and to engage with, a larger, diverse, group of people, I think is very vital. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. And Francisco, I'm going to link all these things that you're talking about below our conversation, our podcast, so people can kind of check it out, and get involved, because I think, like you say, donating your time, your energy, even just engaging with these things is so important. And, you know, I feel like I could talk to you about this all day, but to kind of wrap things up, I think something I'd just love to ask you is, as a personal journey into sustainability, I mean, I feel like 5 years down the line with REV, I started out quite a conscious person, but I think I've evolved into hopefully like a much better version of myself in the last 5 years, just by the reflection of the conversations I've had, what I've learned, etc. And, you know, in the last year and a half of running Costa Brazil, are there any personal changes that you've just seen in yourself that make you feel inspired and happy to maybe be on this sort of new path of running a sustainable business?
I think to give is so nice, right? I think we become unconditionally, intrinsically, attached to this idea of give. Um, I don't know if it sounds a bit, I don't know, but to share.
Yeah.
I think it's very important, and I think I've learned that because I was always very protective of design. I growing up, especially in the fashion industry. Oh my God, we're so like, paranoid about being copied, this and this. And I actually learned through a very entrepreneurial spirit of my partner, Michelle, who kind of helped me break down a little bit of my own rules, of existence. The share is better than not. In terms of really being transparent, in all sorts of levels, right? We are here. We're not perfect. We are here to be happy and to be better. So you go through it. You go experiencing it. And I think that's something that I learned. I'm less paranoid about sharing. I'm less paranoid about communicating the idea. I think being a little more transparent is great. And I think it's something that kudos to you guys, at your age, who also brought that up, right? I think, I think your generation has propelled this openness, and I'm not much older, but I think you guys have, brought, us to think a little bit, especially people my age, who grew up in the 80s and 90s, to be a little more conscientious. And then we feel it, once we're open, right? All those things keep coming, and you're able to make better decisions, across the board. So I think that's probably, I'm less paranoid about sharing.
I love that. And actually, and now I have one final question, because I feel like actually that makes me think, do you feel like with this sort of the tremendous loss and just upset of COVID-19, do you think that we're moving towards a sort of a more open community? Like, do you think, because it's funny, like I feel like we're seeing two sides of human nature. We're seeing sides that are very selfish, very protective, very, I'm going to keep me and mine safe. But then you're also seeing these amazing outpourings of empathy and sympathy and coming together. Do you think that this is pushing us towards a more?
I think COVID is a tip of the iceberg. In other words, I think there's a lot more behind it that we have to come out for us to have a clean, more beautiful way of communicating and being. I think that's creating a lot of stress, obviously. So we're very uncomfortable, but at the same time, the greatest thing of being humans is that we are very, there's a lot of compassion, I think in humanity as well. So I think we are just dying, to come out, dying to be near, dying to touch again, and I think that will happen. But I think the economical situation in the world, where, you're going to see a lot more poverty, you're going to see a lot more suffering. And I'm speaking of Brazil at the moment, right? I mean, the US as well, I think we're going to go through a major uproar, the whole world is, but especially in Brazil, with very challenging, leadership, and not having really people wanting even to take that those jobs, you know what I mean? It makes things very different because it's all about an example, right? I think we live for an example. You know, you're inspired by people, inspired by your parents. You know, always remember things your parents did. So I think COVID-19 is just the beginning of a major transformation. You know, I think we have to be very patient. I don't think this is going to be sorted overnight. I think we're going to go through a lot of hardships that we're living now. Now we're feeling it because we have been told to stay. We have to stay home. You can't communicate. You have to be, you know, living in such a ways. But once we're a little more open, I think there will be a lot more grit coming. I think you're going to be able to read people much easier. You know, I think the good, the bad, and the ugly will all be there. So I think there'll be a lot more transparency. So I don't think this is going to transform the world overnight into a better world, but I think it's the beginning for us and for the young generations to be able to make better decisions based upon what they're seeing today. You know?
Well, I could not agree more, and I think that is the perfect end point. So thank you, Francisco, and I cannot wait
Very
to
welcome. Thank you. I wanted to talk about the products, the cream, you know, waterless formulation, which is so great.
We're gonna have to do it again. I think I've been talking to you for an hour. I feel like we're gonna have to just do it again.
I know. I just talked too much, but you could have stopped me.
No,